Welcome to the Rising Laterally podcast.
Each episode, you will learn something fascinating so you can bring big ideas to your small talk.
Your growth is our growth. Listening to these episodes, subscribing to our weekly newsletter, engaging our posts on social media, and sharing our show with your friends and family is deeply appreciated as we work hard to expand this platform. You can also visit our page at buymeacoffee.com to contribute what you think the show is worth.
To the folks who are taking this step, we can't thank you enough. Look for the link in our show notes for more details about how you can support and follow us.
And now, please enjoy this episode.
Joining us from Basel, Switzerland, today we have Kordel France on the podcast. He's got his BS from Utah State University in Applied Statistics and Physics. He's completing his Master of Science in Machine Learning and AI from Johns Hopkins University, and he is the CEO and founder of Seekar Technologies, a company focused on developing computer vision products and autonomous systems. Kordel is here with us today to talk about the emerging world of artificial intelligence, an important field which we actually have not yet spent much time discussing on Rising Laterally. So we're really excited to be sharing this space with you. Welcome to the show, Kordel.
Excellent. Thank you for having me, and thank you to your listeners.
I think it would be helpful to first maybe get our terms straight here. So a lot of us have heard of AI and machine learning used in the same sentence. I think a lot of us laymen probably use those words interchangeably without giving it much thought. What, Kordel, are the core differences between artificial intelligence and machine learning?
So machine learning can be thought of as a subset of artificial intelligence, or kind of inside the umbrella of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence encompasses a lot of different areas of really highly sophisticated algorithms and, computational mathematics, et cetera. And machine learning is basically it accommodates a more general term of a lot of those algorithms. So they're used synonymously, kind of in pop culture and literature to some degree. But think of AI as a subset of machine learning.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And where does the autonomous technology factor into that umbrella?
So the autonomous technology, so something can be autonomous without necessarily having machine learning capabilities. So for example, like an elevator is autonomous, right, to some degree, but doesn't necessarily use machine learning in order to function, or even to go really simple, like an escalator. But it's acting in its own accord to some degree. Now you can get really fancy, in which you have like robotic arms on a manufacturing line, which I would argue are still autonomous, but not using machine learning because they're just following really sophisticated steps of autonomy. Machine learning really comes in when you have something that's evolving and adapting to the environment and learning how to change itself and change its reactions to things based off of the input it's getting. And that's kind of the difference between autonomy and machine learning.
Okay, that's very helpful. Well, I know that you worked in defense for some time. I was listening to one of your appearances on another podcast. It was interesting. It sounds like as a sector, they're hesitant to move into AI and machine learning and incorporating those technologies into what they do because there's liability handing over the reins from the human to the machine. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly correct. And just to expound upon it a bit, AI itself is kind of a relatively new field. And when defense companies push out a new product, they want to make sure that there's a proven track record of it working. Part of the cons of AI right now is that it's kind of black box in nature and it's hard to explain. So while there might be a proven track record, it's hard to explain how it got to its results. Now, a combination of a relatively new technology and something that's kind of hard to explain why it evolved a certain solution has been a bit of a detractor in some areas of defense, because if something's wrong, if an autonomous weapon is wrong, then lives can be lost. The consequences are very, very severe. So they are a little bit reluctant to incorporate it into certain aspects of defense, but it seems to be gaining more momentum in areas where maybe AI isn't the last decision maker, right? AI doesn't decide whether the trigger should be pulled, but it really provides just more situational awareness for the soldier, et cetera. So that's kind of where it seems to be gaining more momentum at the moment.
It's also the point where I start to think about like where AI could go wrong. And you were just kind of alluding to it. If in the defense world, all of a sudden AI is turning weapons and kind of turning us against it. It's like what you see out of movies, right? Like that's something that I feel like if it's in a movie, it might become a reality.
Absolutely. And that's pop culture's kind of made us all think of that. So like if I just mention AI plus defense, you automatically think of an autonomous weapon, right? Just because we've all seen Terminator and we've all seen iRobot and everything, War of the Worlds, etc. But there's steps we can take before that. Now, if you do allow AI to be the last decision maker, that stuff is possible. And there's constraints and there's some steps we should take now to try to avoid it getting to that point. But if you kind of use it right now as just something that can provide more information for a better decision to be made, that seems to be maybe a relatively safer route in which soldiers can utilize artificial intelligence without necessarily being exposed to the really dire consequences that can result of a bad decision.
So dig into that a little bit, because I'd like to actually try to talk a little bit about how we can contain this if things do go wrong. So we just talked about it in the defense and weapons space, but what about in like the privacy space or with automated job loss or with deepfakes? These are some common concerns out there around AI. So in your opinion, where are we as it relates to how we can contain this? Where could we be or should we be? And what needs to bridge that gap?
You mentioned job replacement, I think briefly, and I think that's an excellent bridge between what we're just discussed. I think that there's a lot of focus and there's a lot of maybe a bad rap around AI replacing jobs, and I'm not necessarily of that camp, right? There may be opportunities for artificial intelligence to completely relieve jobs, but I think a better approach would be to actually augment humans' capabilities, right? Where we actually use artificial intelligence to make us hyper productive, right? So maybe there are some jobs where maybe it isn't as safe, it's not safe for a human to operate, maybe like a coal mine or something, right? That there's an opportunity for artificial intelligence to step in and help out. Now, you ask, well, what's the coal miner going to do? He might be out of a job. Not necessarily. So if we can take these workers and train them, maybe from a blue collar standpoint to a white collar standpoint, and say, we're going to teach you how to operate the robots. We're going to teach you how to program, right? We're going to teach you how to troubleshoot this, because if a company gets to a point where they can replace a coal miner, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to operate it. You're going to have to provide maintenance on it. There's going to be some other point where a man is going to have to be involved. And I think that's a much better route to pursue, because you're going to mine more efficiently. You're not sacrificing the safety of your workers, right? And it's really just a much better approach in which we can see more productivity. Now, considering that with the defense and healthcare sectors, I mentioned that AI shouldn't be the last thing in the chain to replace something. Mm-hmm. Healthcare is the same way. If you can think of you don't want to have, we worked on a product where we were screening for different conditions in an X-ray, right? Whether it was pneumonia or COVID-19, et cetera. You don't want AI to be the last decision maker, because if you triage someone with pneumonia and they actually died of COVID without ever seeing a doctor, it's like, well, that's terrible. The doctor is the professional. You should use AI to help the doctor have more situational awareness about what's going on, give them details about how all these patients coming in are behaving and what they're exposed to, and then let the doctor make the decisions, right? It shouldn't decide who lives and who dies. And I think that's a much better approach that can definitely reap a lot more advances than just the direct replacement approach.
That makes sense.
Makes sense from efficiency, from safety, and a productivity standpoint, for sure.
Absolutely. When I think of AI, a few things come to mind. I think of transportation with autonomous vehicles. I think of finance with fraud detection, because I worked at a graph database company for a little while. I think manufacturing with robots and AI-based assembly lines, which we've already talked a little bit about on the show. But as someone in the field like yourself, can you give us a little bit of a bird's eye view of how has been adopted by various industries? Like, which industries in your mind has been quick to adopt AI and has made real headway there, and what industries or sectors are lagging behind?
The sectors that I think have been very quick to adopt and made the most advancements are social media and self-driving vehicles and smart home assistants. Those are the three key areas that I think have made the best utility of AI. They've been quick to adopt social media and smart home assistants by leveraging artificial intelligence. If they're wrong, if Alexa suggests the wrong mute song to play, or she doesn't quite respond the right way, then the consequences aren't that dire, right? We might have some frustration on our end, but no one's lives really affected. Same with social media. Facial recognition, being able to automatically tag someone in a post, is if they mistag somebody, it's not the end of the world, right? It's pretty harmless. Self-driving cars, on the other hand, there's been a lot of rapid development in AI due to the advances in self-driving cars, but they're kind of on the other end of the continuum, where if a self-driving car, makes a mistake on the road, who's at fault? Or if a self-driving car has to, decide whether to swerve into a crowd of people or, hit a cyclist, can you really justify that response? I mean, there's a lot of ethics concerns in that area, right? But they've been very big adopters of artificial intelligence. I think the best adoption I've seen is by companies who have taken an incremental approach. So instead of saying, I'm going to provide 200 times the return, or I'm going to triple your production, or et cetera, they provide marginal incremental improvements, such as a 10% rate of return increase, or I'm going to increase production by 15%. By leveraging artificial intelligence, you're not over promising and under delivering. You're leveraging AI at an incremental level that allows you to grow to that 2x, 3x, 4x magnitude. So I think that's a safe approach right now, because AI is still relatively young. There's a lot to figure out with it, and a lot of concerns in different regards.
Makes sense.
Let's linger on that. Oh yeah, go for it, Jay.
Well, I was going to ask, what industries you think have been slow to adopt, and where the most room is for growth.
Sure. So some industries that I think have been slower to adopt are agriculture. They've been picking up a lot of momentum lately, but agriculture, really in general, it's interesting because ag actually had self-driving tractors or self-steering tractors back in like early 2000s. And I grew up on a farm, so I actually, I partook of these opportunities and I saw this, but they've kind of been lagging in some degree with, technology advancements other than that. So we've had self-driving tractors before we'd had self-driving cars, which is interesting. Yeah. And so I think they've been a little bit slow to adapt. There are some aspects in medicine that have been slow to adapt, for reasons being that in order for something to occur in medicine, or for a decision to be made in medicine, it needs to be explained, and you've got to be able to follow basically a decision process. And again, AI is kind of a black box in some degree. If you can't explain that, it's hard for a physician to trust what this algorithm is saying. So I think ag has been slow to adopt just because there's been investment elsewhere, and the self-driving approach has been, there's been a lot more investment by VCs in the, just consumer transportation industries. Healthcare, on the other hand, or some aspects of healthcare rather, I think have been slower to adopt just because there needs to be more emphasis on explainability.
That makes sense.
Yeah, let's linger on this. By the way, Jay, sorry for cutting you off, but as the coffee mug says, I came, I saw, I made it awkward. I
love it.
Yeah, so apologies for cutting you off, but let's linger on this for a second because, you had mentioned one of the keys where AI is kind of accelerated is in the smart home space. Then you mentioned Alexa, then you mentioned if it plays a song, and that for me, struck something around AI and music. So just a little research that I did in preparation for this, AI and music is pretty cool. Like the progress there is pretty fast. There was a Forbes article written on this, and it looked at several ways that AI is transforming the music industry. And one way was through song creation. There's actually companies and software that are using AI and deep learning algorithms to help normal mainstream users compose their own songs and soundtracks. So that's becoming a really cool tool for content creators on TikTok, YouTube, and Twitch, which is fascinating. The other thing I learned from that article was that back in 2016, there was a Grammy-nominated producer who used IBM Watson to analyze 5 years of songs as well as cultural data from films, social media, and online articles to figure out if there was a theme for the AI to generate a song that fans would actually like. And when that song was released in 2016, within 48 hours, it shot up to the number 4 spot on the iTunes Hot Tracks chart. And it has like 2 million views right now, which was fascinating when I read it. And then the other thing was AI is helping find new artists by combing through music and trying to identify the next breakout star. So Apple and Warner Music have already acquired small startups that help with that. So you talk about a space where AI is accelerating, where people just may not realize it. Music.
Yeah, very cool. I would also recommend people check out this song that AI produced in the style of Nirvana. Basically, they analyzed all these Nirvana songs, analyzed Kurt Cobain's voice, and I think it was in April of this past year, AI created a new Nirvana track, and it is, it's not his organic voice, but it's indistinguishable, I think, from any other Nirvana track you'd find on the B-side of the album. Like, it sounds exactly like them. It's unbelievable.
Wow, that's interesting. That's I did not know that about the Grammy song, and I'm actually going to go back and research that because that's quite fascinating.
Yeah, the song is called "Not Easy."
Not Easy. Okay.
Yeah, and
that is quite fascinating.
Alex the Kid is the composer.
Interesting. So that brings up, if I may just briefly, 2 things. I want to touch on deepfakes in a moment, but first, you guys know who Eddie Van Halen is, correct?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big Eddie Van Halen fan, and one of the first things I actually did with AI was build an algorithm that could listen to a song and determine if Eddie Van Halen was playing the guitar. And yeah,
that is awesome.
Just because he's got a unique style, right? So I geeked out for a moment, but it was pretty cool. But for deep fakes, this is really cool because AI is able to, what you just mentioned about music, AI is able to really actually produce what people want to hear, right? Now, there's the contrapositive of that where you think of AI, and if it's able to produce what people want to hear and it's able to synthesize a voice, perhaps, how do you know if something produced is actually generated by a human at all? Or if, it's the same thing with, we've seen videos, I'm sure, where people are saying things where they really didn't say because it's called, the deep fake videos. And it's right. Where do we go at that point? How do we know in the future? It could be very easy for someone to put our faces, our bodies, and make it look like we were doing something we never even did just through an AI algorithm. It's like, that addresses a whole new ethical standpoint on, what do we do to stop that?
Totally. Yeah, no, I think it's a huge risk, especially when they're getting the audio piece of that down as well. Like I've heard, Joe Rogan has so much audio out there, so I've seen people with AI replicate his voice, and you just imagine how powerful that is when you pair the deep fake with the deep audio, if you want to call it that. I mean, that really knows no limits in terms of like the societal unrest, the amount of misinformation that could spread if people are creating false videos of our political leadership or leadership from industry. It's just an unbelievable threat.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
And I'm curious, just double back on the Eddie Van Halen thing. Like, what were the markers that you were able to identify in his style? I'm just kind of curious. Maybe we go deeper into that because I think that's a pretty fascinating project.
So it was when I was I was a little more naive onto how a neural network worked, AI worked in the beginning. So I can probably uncover more now that I know more, but from what I was able to determine at the time, Eddie Van Halen does these certain these tapping, these certain really quick tapping strokes. That was one indicator. So these really quick tapping chords that he produced. But he also, his guitar was tuned in a certain way that was kind of consistent throughout most of, especially his early albums, or Van Halen's early albums. That the AI was able to pick up basically just from the sound of the guitar and the frequency and the amplitude of those sound waves that he was playing. So the biggest indicator was really the way he tuned his guitar. But as it relied on that a little bit less as you listen to his later albums because they kind of start producing a little slower music. They have a little bit different of a sound, and so it started looking kind of more for those tapping melodies. But it was
cool.
Interesting. Yeah,
definitely.
Absolutely. We were just about to get down the ethics route. You were talking about deepfakes, and we were talking about the threat there. I have to ask you, what is your opinion of how humans are going to interact with each other emotionally in the future? So I noticed on your website that you talk about emotion recognition, which tracks eye movement and blink rate and skeletal movement and facial expressions, and it can analyze speech and vocal indicators. So my question is this: do you think that we're going to be kinder in the future, or are we going to continue to spew hate? And I think about it like this. I think about it in the days prior to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, where as humans, you had to interact with each other. Then came this form where at any moment, at any time, you could talk about someone or talk to someone just through text. In the future, if we're going towards the metaverse or whatever verse you want to call it, and we're now avatars, but we're still in our human form, do you think that we're going to actually have to be nicer to each other because we're going to start to recognize the emotions that are coming back to us, like the immediate feedback of the text that we're typing? We'll be able to see, like, if I'm talking smack about Jay and I type it out and we're in our avatar world and I notice like he's got a tear coming down his face, I'll probably be nicer to him, right? Like, I want to know what your thoughts are on humans moving forward. Are we going to be nicer to each other in an accelerated world where it's digital and avatars, or are we going to be more mean?
That's an interesting approach, an interesting angle. As far as the avatar approach goes, I haven't really thought about that, but immediately what I can think of is that I think that for example, I have a harder time interpreting emotions than my girlfriend does. She's able to understand when people are a lot, angry or sad and everything a lot easier than I am in general. And so by having some AI like this, it kind of puts everyone on a level playing field. So if someone maybe spews hate a little more and they're a little more angry and they're able to, maybe they don't recognize emotions as well, maybe this AI tech is able to say, whoa, hold on, maybe you shouldn't send that tweet, because this,
preventative.
It's exactly. That's one way I think it could help. Now, if you look really, really far in the future in which, we all have chips in our heads and they all communicate through Bluetooth, right? And we're processing emotions that way. I think it kind of diverges along two different paths, right? It's like everyone might be nice, or, they might be controlled by one entity in which everyone, that entity says you can only say good things, or, you can only say a certain quantity of things or a certain number of things and react in a certain way. Emotion recognition is tough because if you think about it from like how AI is being built, and how we're replicating some human capabilities. Like, we've replicated vision pretty well and being able to identify different things. Still not as good as humans, but it's getting there. We replicated hearing, being able to interpret how things are being processed through microphones and everything. But emotions are very hard to replicate and interpret. It's like, how do you build a system that quantifies a smile or quantifies happiness. Okay, they're smiling, but some people smile when they're angry or they're being deceitful.
Yep.
So that's and there's actually a lot of research behind that right now, behind like how do you actually deduce emotion to numbers so that you can input it into a computer for it to recognize and learn. And
Wow.
it's kind of it's a hard thing for sure.
Yeah, it seems like that kind of ties into the work you've been doing with Texas neuropsychology. I found that on LinkedIn. I thought that was fascinating. You're building voice and emotion recognition software to detect PTSD and other psychological conditions in Texas inmates through machine learning. It's really fascinating work and no doubt extremely important. I was wondering, can you tell us a little bit about like how you got involved in that and how you're using these technologies to detect those subtleties in human behavior and speech?
Sure, absolutely. So emotion recognition has different ways in which it can be used. It can definitely be used in a bad way, right? Just like facial recognition can, and it can definitely be abused. We saw some instances in where it was maybe being abused, and we kind of wanted to help contribute towards a different way, and that is in identifying indicators of certain neurodegenerative diseases. PTSD, well, not maybe neurodegenerative disease, but it is a psychological condition. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, etc. A lot those diseases, if you find indicators early, you can stop it, but there's no way to digress the disease once it's gotten to a certain point. You can't just say, well, this individual has been diagnosed with Parkinson's, let's give him some medication to get rid of it. It's basically, as I understand it, it's the state of where it's at. Once you detect it, you can only keep it from progressing, but you can't get it back. So there are indicators that you can look at in order to try to find that early. And we sought to do that with artificial intelligence in a few different manners. So in a nutshell, what this is it's a mobile app that sits on a tablet, and it uses cameras and it uses microphones to record speech from both the neuropsychologist and the patient, and to analyze the skeletal body movements of the patient, analyze their pupil constriction, track their pupils, their facial expressions, etc. So what it's trying to do, and by the way, these patients have all consented to being a part of a study, right? We're not doing this without their consent. But what this AI is trying to do is it's trying to basically quantify what certain behaviors are for PTSD, for depression, for Parkinson's, dementia, et cetera, so that we can detect those early and try to and nip it in the bud before it progresses. We started with PTSD, depression, and Alzheimer's just to try, because we needed to start somewhere, because there's not a lot of data or research that we could leverage to get us some momentum forward. So we're basically starting with a blank drawing board. And we found some interesting things. If I've got PTSD and I don't want to talk about a certain thing, I start looking around and I maybe won't hold eye contact, or my pupils start to dilate or constrict. I start getting kind of fidgety in my seat, right? If someone starts tapping their foot in frustration, it's something, right? The AI is able to pick up all these things and say, okay, when you ask this question about, May 5th, 2016, they started getting a little antsy. We noticed a change in their behavior. Maybe they don't want to talk about it. That's fine. Don't press the issue, but maybe they really do. And it's worth investigating a little more so you can get to the root cause of the issue.
Yep.
So yeah, you can imagine the different ways in which this can go. And there's obviously that technology can be abused, and we tried to keep it under tight hold with this partnering neuropsychology firm, and they've been fantastic. I've learned so much about the brain and about neurodegenerative diseases and everything that I never knew before, just by talking to them and having them be in the loop on how to advise our development. And what's really cool is you have the AI, which is learning and advising the doctor, and then the doctor is advising how to make the AI better, saying, no, this isn't correct. This is not what happened. And you have this really beautiful synergy that they just are making each other better. And it's really, really quite interesting. And it's really cool to see, because it's this element of AI and humans merging for the better in a sense.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. It makes
That's fascinating work.
Yeah, very fascinating. It makes me think there's space too for synergy between AI and just like normal family therapists, to be able to pick up on those things that may be triggering for people. So they may not have PTSD or Alzheimer's, but maybe someone's struggling to figure out kind of what's the heart of an issue with the patient. And by using this AI to review the footage and see, if every time their mom came up or every time their brother came up or, some facet of their childhood came up, they had a specific response. It seems like there's room there for synergy. It's exciting.
Yes, you've exactly hit the point. And what's another feature that this AI does is it creates a transcription, a log of everything that happens so that we can identify certain things like that. Every time they mention their brother, they got really, they got really jittery, their foot started tapping, they lost eye contact, and their pace of speech sped up really fast so that you can understand what they were saying, and those types of things. So there's a lot of interesting things that we're able to uncover with that I really hope benefit that particular field of medicine.
Very cool.
Oh, and then that can branch off, because imagine if normal people can get access to those transcripts, then it just helps with everyone getting better at the art and craft of having caring conversations with each other.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, actually. And a whole other realm that I didn't even think about. You could use this to kind of construct social advisories about how to react to certain thing, or how people should respond to certain events or indicators that other people are going through. That's an excellent point I've never even thought about. That's terrific.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Just going back to a couple things. You had mentioned doctors, neuroscientists, the brain. I want to connect that to your thoughts on where we are with AI and consciousness coming together. And what is your view right now on that? And maybe do you have a sense of what the split is in the AI community versus the neuroscientist community about where we are with that? Is this something that's possible, insurmountable? So again, with AI blending with consciousness, where are we today? Where could we be? Where should we be? And what needs to be put in place to get us there?
So the first thing that I think is crucial to understand is it seems like nobody really has a clear definition of what is consciousness. How do you define consciousness, and where do you draw the lines of this is conscious and this is not? So that's one thing in which I feel like is moving closer to being defined, but also needs to be defined in order to reach that point. Now, in order for something to be conscious, it seems to be collectively agreed upon that you do need to have all five senses, or you need to have a majority of the senses in order to be conscious to some degree. So you need to be able to replicate those. So AI is doing a very good job right now of replicating parts of vision and the visual cortex. It's doing a pretty good job at replicating parts of the auditory cortex. Where the limits are is that we have, if you consider a self-driving car for a moment, which have very, very sophisticated vision models, they're identifying stop signs and pedestrians and cars and lanes and lane markings and everything, but it's probably not able to identify, it's not able to identify a stereo or identify, whether someone's upset or happy or sad. So AI is at a very, very narrow scope right now, in which we're doing very good at being replicating different parts of the brain, but having it come together collectively, we're not there yet, right? Something where we're at iRobot status, which can think and hear and make decisions on its own and move around like in the fashion of a human. We're a long ways from that, in my opinion. However, the needle being moved forward with AI and defining consciousness seems to be moving the needle forward in neuroscience and how they understand how the brain works, and which in turn moves a needle forward in AI. So again, you have this beautiful synergy of, AI is helping quantify what different parts of the brain are doing and how we're able to replicate those through algorithms. Neuroscientists are defining the limits of what AI can and can't do and where it needs to work on, which in turn define new limits of these algorithms, et cetera. And it's this beautiful synergy. So I didn't really give you a discrete answer to your question, because I don't know I think we're a long ways away from it, but I think that we need to merge all these narrow applications of AI together into a collectively intelligent, we call it artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is, it's able to merge all of these things together to have a, collective understanding of what's going on, and it's near human intelligence. if that makes sense.
Yeah.
What I gather from that is that we are a long way from this, which means there's plenty of opportunity for iterations to occur and for people to find this blend where it actually works. And like at that intersection is where not only you find your ignorance, but you find that moment of growth. And so that's exciting for the future, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. Eloquently put. I agree.
Yeah, I think too with consciousness, as we've talked about before on the show, we're still dealing with the hard problem of consciousness in terms of being able to determine from a biological standpoint, from a neurological standpoint, how all the little bits of matter that make up our bodies have organized themselves in such a way that they produce the mind. And, I think you could imagine a technology where there are all five senses captured via sensors, like they're able to take in visual inputs, they're able to take in audio inputs, they're able to take in tactile inputs, etc. But there's not that like subjective view out on the world that we have as humans. We're aware where the lights are on, so to speak. And I think without maybe understanding exactly how that works, without breaking through the hard problem of consciousness, it seems like that piece of it, that view out on the world, would be pretty hard to replicate in the digital space, at least from what I read.
Yes, I 100% agree. And to that point, it seems like we might get to, I think a lot of AI practitioners confuse intelligence with consciousness. It's like if we develop something that is intelligent, understands what you're saying, can go respond and execute on a task you ask it to do, can hold a conversation with you, is that consciousness? I mean, no, not really. In my opinion, I mean, intelligence is kind of a subset of consciousness, and consciousness is a whole other being.
Right. Exactly.
Because of the parameters you just spoke about.
It's that
Totally.
experience.
Yeah, exactly.
You had mentioned the words detect subtleties a couple times just a few minutes ago, Jay. So on that, I think it would be interesting if we talk about something that came up last week. There was an article in the journal about Steph Curry and his quest to continue to dominate the jump shot. And so I'm blending AI and sports right now. So if you don't know about this article, it's really fascinating. He teamed up with Noah Basketball, which is a company it's a shot tracking technology company. And they like explore all of this fascinating data. So they actually looked at millions of 3-pointers from NBA players, and they found that 79% of shots at dead center of the rim go in. There was a little difference up to 1 or 2 inches off center, like call it 79% success rate, 77% success rate, and only a minimal reduction out to 3 inches, 74% success rate. But when you get to 4 or 5 inches, the company found that it's like falling off of a cliff. So you talk about detecting subtleties right here, right? So those few inches that may not sound like a lot, they make an enormous difference. The shooting percentage from 3 inches to 4 inches drops to 67% before it plunges again to 55% at 5 inches and 28% success rate at 6 inches. And while as a human, and we're watching the game, we can't see those inches with the naked eye, like all we notice is the make or the miss. So they have this technology in place. Steph Curry, teams up with them in the summer during his workouts. He's using this technology for up to 90 minutes at a time to challenge himself. He set his window of success to only 3 inches on shots and 2 inches on free throws. So here he is, the greatest shooter of all time. And he would get instant feedback on his makes and misses. And even on the makes, he's getting feedback of whether it was within those really tight windows. So my point of bringing that up is because, Jay, you mentioned detecting subtleties, right? We're talking about inches. I also think it's fascinating because now this is AI in sports, but really it's fascinating because this is motivation. You have the greatest shooter of all time who's aiming to get swishes within swishes. Like, think about that.
Yeah, that's honestly really incredible. Jay, I'll let you comment for a second, but if not, I've got a couple questions. That is really interesting.
Yeah, go for it, Kordel. Absolutely.
So, because I was thinking about this a few days ago, like entertainment. Why do we pay money to go see concerts and to go see people play sports? It's because they excel at a task at a much greater magnitude than we ourselves can, right? Like I want to go see Steph Curry play basketball because he's just unbelievable and he's way better than I can. He's superhuman.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
if we merge that with AI, or we allow everyone to kind of be AI enabled, right? We're all on the same playing field. So are we still going to go experience entertainment? If I can sing or if I can play guitar just as well as Eddie Van Halen, would I go watch him in concert? Back in the day, I don't know, but that right there that you spoke about is a really fantastic application, in my opinion, of AI. Is they weren't promising Steph Curry, like, hey, we're gonna triple your free throw percentage. Like we're gonna make you 300 times better than you are. Some outrageous marketing statement, right? They're saying, hey,
Right.
we've deduced it down to this finite magnitude of what you need to increase your free throw percentage a few percent. Here's what you need to do. And it sounds like it's working fantastically. Like that's beautiful. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, I think it is a really fascinating question. Like once we're enhanced by AI, will we have the same appreciation for some of the superhuman feats? And it was actually touched on by Kevin Roos in a book, Future Proof, that we read for Rising Laterally earlier in the year. And he made the point that like, a speedboat can go whatever it is, 50 miles an hour on the water, but we still go watch swimmers because we're impressed by the fact that they're able to get up to the speeds they are without that handicap. So I don't know, I could imagine a world where there's sort of like battle of the bands with AI and battle of the bands without AI. And there's still kind of a market for the non-AI competitions as well, but maybe it's a split.
It's like you go to register for an event and you have to check a box. AI, are you AI enhanced? Yes or no?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I could see it. Well, one other thing we wanted to talk with you about, Kordel, was the AI race between the US and China. At least from what I've gathered from the headlines, it seems like China kind of has the upper hand on us now. Not only are they growing at an incredibly fast rate in terms of their wealth creation, but they also seem to be, a few steps ahead in terms of the technology and AI specifically that they've been building. Where do you come down on that? And what do you see as the implications of, a 2050 where China has beat the US and the rest of the world in terms of the AI race?
This is an interesting topic because I was reading a couple of weeks ago, one of the senior software, he led some department of AI with the Pentagon, but he stepped down because he was frustrated with the fact that he couldn't make as much progress with the US adopting AI as he wanted to. And he said that we've already lost in the race to China, and we're not going to be able to even catch up now.
Uh-huh.
So, and I don't know how accurate that is. He's probably got a lot more insight than I do, obviously. But one of the key things that seems to be common with China and why they're so far ahead of us is there's no boundaries on how they can use AI. There's no ethics concerns, right? If like right now, there have actually been some companies that have been blacklisted with facial recognition because in the US, because they've found to produce biased results and discriminatory results. China, even if that is the case, they move forward accordingly based off of what I've read and what I've seen. So they aren't really concerned with ethics at all. They seem to be putting it into weapons. It's kind of they're going through like a trial and error phase in some regards, saying, well, if it doesn't work and we make a mistake, we're going to be able to fine tune it along the way and get to a point where it's actually, the AI is actually perfect and it's learned. Yeah, I mean, that is an effective way to do it. If you keep going down that path with no regard to, there's no funding constraints, there's no regard to ethics, people live or die, their lives are, you make inappropriate conclusions based off of a bad facial recognition scan and someone's lives affected and you don't care, then yeah, I mean, you're going to evolve your AI to a degree that is at a much higher level than someone who doesn't follow those rules. In the US, we seem to be a little more awoken to the ethics concerns with artificial intelligence, not to the degree in which I think we should be, but I think we are we're a lot more open to addressing it than China is. So I think that's one thing that is slowing us down. Another aspect is, and I kind of alluded to it earlier with defense, is it's just AI is still a relatively new field, and in order for us to move forward with updating systems with artificial intelligence that maybe doesn't have a large track record of it working correctly, some companies are apprehensive to do this because they don't want to commit to something that has 6 months worth of testing and hasn't been approved by a regulatory authority such as the FDA or the FAA or whatever. So they're a little slower to adopt. China can force companies to adopt it, whether it works or not, and they kind of have that power. And again, this is based off of what I've read, and I feel like I'm pretty well up to date on the literature behind this, but I'm not trying to incriminate China or anything. I'm just saying this is the evidence that's used to support this observation. Which is interesting. If that's the case, then they are going to outrun us for sure, and they're going to become an AI superpower. And one thing that's very powerful is AI over social media. And if you lift all boundaries over that, I think that has more power than the nuclear weapons and autonomous weapons. I think that's the thing that we need to focus on and look at is how AI is used in social media and really analyzing and surveillance really over people.
It just makes me feel like we are just on that brink between this becoming extremely abusive or this becoming something that's used for extreme good. And this is such a fine line that we're all kind of on, and it's like on us to make this decision. Otherwise,
right.
Because I do agree. Like earlier, you had mentioned something that I never thought about, which was like using AI in a preventative way. Like before that tweet is even sent out, you get something that maybe nudges you in a direction where you don't send it. So I'm like, we have the ability to think like this. We have the ability to program like this. We also have the ability to just go the extreme opposite way. So just this idea of the line between abuse and extreme good is very fine right now.
Right. Yes, I 100% agree. It can diverge among two very different paths. And some people ask the question, well, what can we do now to try to constrain that? And it's like, do we need some FDA, some FAA, some federal agency that approves algorithms before they're published, right? Right now, anyone can go download a project with 10 lines of code and make a facial recognition system with a $30 computer chip and camera they bought off Amazon. And if they raise funding, they can deploy it in a consumer setting. That can be scary, right? Because it's never checked along the way. Now, part of the beauty of AI is right now, and why we're making such rapid progress, is because it's not checked along the way, and that's why we're able to see so much of the great benefits behind it. So there's definitely a fine line between, it takes so long to get an AI algorithm approved that it's synonymous with getting a drug approved through the FDA and going through a clinical trial. And you can just download it and push it and without any checks along the way. There's some intermediary that needs to happen, but it's unclear exactly what that needs to be to make sure that it's moved forward in an ethical manner and it's progressing at a pace that we are able to keep up with the superpowers of the world.
Yeah, it seems like if we were to heavily regulate it like we do with drugs, then that would put us potentially even further behind in the AI race with China. But at the same time, I guess we're left to sort of hope that the people that are creating AI and creating algorithms are, doing it with good intentions. And there are more people creating benevolent programs than malevolent programs. So I guess it's kind of, a matter of having faith in the community of programmers working on these types of problems. And that
Absolutely.
actually does kind of bring me to my last question here. I know we haven't really talked much about Seekar Technologies. I know you're doing a lot of great things over there, but in terms of the benevolent things that AI can bring to the world, is there maybe like one project you're working on now that you'd like to share with us, and what you think the positive outcomes of that work may be in the future?
The neuropsychology project I mentioned is probably the most impactful. The core principles we try to follow with our products is probably the most crucial, I think, to why we provide advantage of as a company. One is that we try to focus on developing ethical AI. So we don't want to end up in the same boat as some facial recognition companies. So we try to have a lot of peer review over our data to make sure the data is not biased, and a lot of peer review over our algorithms. So by people both in the field that we're trying to develop these algorithms for, by non-engineers and by engineers, right? So we have a very well-rounded, balanced data set in which we have addressed as much as possible any bias that exists. The second thing is we try to develop our products to all live on the device. We call it running AI at the edge, which means that our artificial intelligence doesn't live on the cloud. You don't have to have a cloud connection in order to use it. We protect your privacy. If you want better quality control, you can allow us to access, the data on those artificial intelligence models. But if you don't, you can restrict us, and the AI model lives on your device, and it's never touched, right? Your privacy is protected. It's encrypted. It'll never be looked at by us. It seems to be a pretty hot topic given some of the privacy debates we've seen in the world among different social media companies and everything. But those are probably the two key principles that I think are the most interesting and slightly different approach than you'll see with other AI companies.
Yeah, no, I appreciate those standards that you're holding yourself to. That's great. Well, one final question we have for you. We've been asking it to all of our guests the last maybe 6 months now. If you could be any animal for a day, what would it be and why, Kordel?
I'd want to be an eagle. So it's called the peregrine falcon. And at one point I read it was the fastest bird in the world. One, because I've always wanted to fly, right? And flying at an incredible speed would be fantastic. But two, it'd be really interesting to just see the world from such a dynamic, an overview point of view under your own volition, right? If you're in a plane and you see it, you're not in control. I mean, even if you're the pilot, you're still not in control. But being able to say, I'm seeing the world at its highest point and I'm in control under my own volition, I think that would be surreal. So a peregrine falcon.
Nice. I like that.
Incredible. And then what's trippy about that is that as you're doing that, you notice like the smallest mouse in the field and you can just dart down and scoop it up, because that's what falcons birds do. It's like fascinating that they can just spot that,
That's honestly incredible. I wish we need to build contact lenses with AI that allow us to do that.
Totally.
As humans.
Yeah, we just actually, Arjun and I shared a GIF with each other last week of like a guy attached to a bunch of iPads with VR headsets, and he's like flapping his wings. It was meant to be like a AR flight simulation. So I don't know, maybe we'll get to that point where every facet of flying, both the physical, the visual, the audio, will be able to be captured in VR. That'd be super cool.
Yes, I 100% agree. And VR is a fun topic too. So maybe part 2 next time we could talk about, the metaverse and VR.
Let's do it. Awesome. All right, Kordel. Well, we covered a lot of awesome topics. I feel like I learned a lot about where AI is heading, different applications in various industries. We talked about the implications with consciousness. We talked about the implications of the AI race with China. I think there was a lot of meat here. I certainly learned a lot. So we want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you both for your time. I had a blast. I'm a big fan of the show, and I'm going to continue to support and listen to it. So thank you both very much. I learned a lot, and it's an honor to be on.
Thank you.
Much love.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the Rising Weekly newsletter sent out each week.
Every Friday, we expand on the episode with insights, recommendations, and more.
You can sign up at risinglatterly.com.
Thank you.